It's been a while since we talked about Riot's MMO. It's been a month. Yeah, we can do it again. So, the last time we talked about Riot's MMO, we learned that there was no way they were going to cancel it. But better yet, we learned it is Riot's goal to push it out before 2030. Which is quite the exciting news. It means it is happening in our lifetimes. But there is also another interesting thing that happened. This year, as I've been traveling around different events, with there being a real chance I might pop up at the Paris Open for TFT, I get a chance to meet totally random devs from all across Riot Games. And one day, purely by chance, I got to meet some of the people from the MMO team. Now let me tell you, no matter what you ask them, they are good. They know their NDA is valued above gold. Their hands would probably be chopped off should they even flinch. And so, their will was iron, their resolve unbreakable. You can ask them the simplest question, and they always reply, "Yeah, I wish I could tell you." In fact, they reply this so often, there is no way there won't be an NPC called "I wish I could tell you" or something like that. But during our conversation, I learned about a really cool thing. It turns out the MMO team does watch any kind of content that comes out about the Riot MMO. And when people nerd out about MMOs and the universe of Runeterra, it almost functions like a battery for the team. And it always kickstarts a lot of excitement and productivity. In fact, during that conversation, there is a really cool thing that popped up. I told them I always wanted to make one more MMO video where I talked about all the cool places I wanted to see in the game. After which, with their emotionless faces as to not give any hints, in complete silence, they looked at each other and they said, "We'd like to see that." And so today we are literally saving Riot's MMO, because we are continuing our journey into Runeterra, and we are also raising the productivity of the devs. Which also means I would like to ask for one more thing. There is a good chance the devs will read some of the comments, so if you know some places you'd like to see in the MMO, now's your chance. And so, in this video, we are gonna talk about interesting places around Runeterra, which most people will not know about. Because sure, it is one thing to see the capital cities of the regions which everyone knows about, or even some of the other cool places which are badass, but rather than that, I'd like to focus on the unconventional places. These are places that are very hard to find anywhere. They are not in the game, and usually they are not even shown on the map. And we only know about their existence from all the cool niche stories. Which means there is a good chance Riot might miss out on these places as they are building the game. And so, let's fix the game. Starting with the first place I would like to see, which are the ruins of the marketplace of Narimazeth. Yep, I told you these would be unconventional places. So, Narimazeth is, or was, a city in Shurima. In fact, many years ago, it used to be the first ever capital of the Shuriman Deserts. This is where, after separating from Targon, the first ever Shuriman started using the first ever Sundisk to create the first ever Ascended. Now, because they were new at this, it didn't really work out. Instead of the Ascended, they created a lot of abominations. And so, they built the Sundisk again, much bigger this time, and they moved it to the very center of the Shuriman Desert, which created the capital city of the Shuriman Empire. The thing is, Narimazeth is where Xerath was born, with Xerath eventually betraying Emperor Azir and destroying the entire Shuriman Empire. And so, in an act of revenge, the remaining Ascended, without their glorious Emperor, marched onto Narimazeth, and they burned the entire place to ash, together with its people for some reason. All of that is hinted in the story called Twilight of the Gods, but there is also a whole separate story about it in the first ever lore book. Anyway, in Legends of Runeterra, we learned that many years later, after Xerath returned in his arcane form, he turned the ruins of his former homeland into his new base. In fact, his goal in the current day is to bring back the original Sundisk, so that he can continue channeling the celestial power. However, once Riot totally turns this place into a proper raid, where we totally get to fight Xerath as a raid boss, there is a place in here that shouldn't be missed. You see, the Twilight of the Gods is a story that describes the beginning of the end of the Darkin. It was the moment the aspect of Twilight came to Shurima, specifically to Narimazeth, and using the Chalikar, which is the blade that Sivir is currently wielding, the aspect of Twilight used the power of the moon to not only seal the first Darkin inside the Chalikar, with the power being so great those Darkin were instantly cleansed, but after this, with the help of the Lunari, she also taught mortals how to seal the Darkin inside their own weapons. The thing is, this really cool lore moment happens in the former marketplace of Narimazeth, and this is how the story describes it. The space had not been designed as an amphitheater. It had served as Narimazeth's marketplace, but Tanari slaves had carved it from the desert's embrace, and his magic has shaped it with heat so intense it vitrified the sand. Now it was an arena of blown glass, a caldera of smoky black, sea green and numinous iridescence. Its surface captured the soft moonlight and reflected it back in floating veils of silver. And so, inside the ruins of Narimazeth, there should be the place that started the end of the Darkin, which is a place that should look like a giant amphitheater of glass, which was burned with the magic of the Ascended. But now, moving on to the second place of this list. We are actually not moving that far away from Shurima, because next, let's have a look at the 10th city of the Prophet. This place was described in the story The Feast of the Prophet, which is a story that follows Mir, a Noxian who struck an officer and as a result, Noxus wanted him dead, which is why Mir started running south. Eventually, he successfully crossed over into Shurima, and his only way to escape was going further down. He described the place where he was as a place that turns grey. This means that in this story, Mir is somewhere in this general area. It should be north of Ikathia, somewhere in a mountainy area. And funnily enough, even though this is not the place I want to focus on, this story also revealed another interesting area, because Mir wanted to travel to the southernmost point of the Ikathian peninsula. He believed that that place had to have some kind of a smuggler's port, or possibly a stop-off for the fishing ships of Bilgewater. He was hoping to catch a ship there which would give him a new life somewhere on the Serpent Isles. So dear MMO devs, if you're interested in this, you can put something cool to the very tip of Ikathia. But again, the place I want to show you is north of Ikathia. Here, beyond an outcropping of rocks, there was a hole. That's actually how Mir described it. And this hole went far beneath the sands of Shurima. He witnessed cultists throw livestock into the hole, sometimes each other into a hole, sometimes themselves into the hole. And every time something fell in, the hole got bigger. And at this point, it was as big as the city Nashrame. And right next to this hole, there was the 10th city of the Prophet, which is a place full of weird cultists who got twisted by the Void, who were also following the guidance of Malzahar, the Void Prophet who would bring the Void upon this world. The one cool thing is how the story describes the cultists who lived here. Outside of their forms being totally corrupted, their minds had been completely blank. And they got angry at you for thinking, because your thoughts were way too loud. And so, spoiler alert, because Mir was thinking, it was really hard for him to hide among the cultists as he was trying to travel south. And so, Mir was thrown into the hole. And so, Riot, if we get the chance to explore the Shuriman deserts in the MMO, there better be a really big hole east of Shurima, surrounded by some really weird cultists. But enough talking about sands, now let's move into the mainland. So, our next place comes from the story called Finishing Sotes. This is a really awesome story about the performance of a theater. Here, a group was practicing a play about death. That's right, we're talking about Kindred. The thing is, that play which they were practicing turned out to be cursed. It was written by the legendary Sotes. Think of it like a Shakespeare of Runeterra, only she was known around Demacia. and on her deathbed she wrote the Kindred Fables. The issue is, death had claimed her before she was able to finish it. And in fact, the final scene of that play was written as she was passing away, meaning it is filled with what Sotes saw, which would be references to the real afterlife. That part of the play is called The Lamps in the Orchard. And so, to rake in some mad money, the head of the theater located in Knockmerge wanted to finish the play. Specifically, we know that this place is in Olderburg. And we know where that place is thanks to Garen's novella. Basically, it is halfway between Demacia and Noxus. And there, in Olderburg, we had the Murmur's Round. This is a theater that was formed around towering flagstones that formed a circle. At first, rituals were performed here, with every performer and singer carving their sigils into these stones, which turned them into a hollowed ground. But eventually, it also became the Olderburg Theater. Now, at the end of this story, we learned that nobody can finish Sotes' work, because since that final part was written in half-death, to play that story would be to evoke death itself. And so, at the end of that story, everyone dies as they summon Kindred onto themselves. But regardless, as we explore the lands around Knockmerge between Noxus and Demacia, just know that there should be the Murmur's Round, which is a theater with stone pillars, which also served as the ritual ground of Kindred. Now, still staying near a dark topic, next we have to talk about Veigar's Tower, which was revealed in the story called The True and Ghastly Tale of the Beast of Bolehem Tower, which kinda hints what the tower is really called. Bolehem is a small town in the Argent Mountains east of Demacia. This is where Veigar got his story, with the entire story being written as a comedy. I mean, Veigar's story is quite tragic. He was a talented Yordle wizard who got kidnapped by Mordekaiser, after which he got tortured so bad his heart turned towards the dark side. Of course, Veigar is still a Yordle, and so even though he is dark, he is also whimsical. And so while he is trying to be evil, it's really hard for him. And so in this story, the villagers of Bolehem marched onto his tower, and they demanded to know if he was responsible for cursing their stuff. Being the greatest evil mastermind, Veigar denied innocence, but he also denied that he cursed their fields. He was a powerful mage in a reign of terror, but he did not do evil things to them. Regardless, the point is, should we be able to visit the Argent Mountains in the MMO? Because that entire area is filled with dragons and mage nations. Should we roam around, just keep in mind that there should be the chance to also find Veigar's Tower. And let me tell you, that's probably gonna be one hell of an encounter. Which brings us to number 5, which is gonna be the last place on this list. At least in this video. And that is the Treasury of Grubgreg the Hideous. Once upon a time, as Orn was minding his business, Grubgreg marched into his forge. This was Grubgreg the Hideous, who was also one of the oldest trolls in the world. The story described his chest hair being so long it tangled in his toes. This made him trip very often, which is why his nose was broken all the time. Anyway, it turns out Grubgreg also owned a lot of valuable things. And so he asked Orn to build him a door that would keep his treasure safe. At first, Orn refused, but Grubgreg also refused to leave the forge. And so naturally, this ended with a drinking contest. Whoever chucked a keg of troll meat first would win. Should Grubgreg win, he would get the door. Should Orn win, Grubgreg would leave. But of course, Grubgreg was a troll, and trolls cheat. He sneakily put a piece of true ice into Orn's keg, which perpetually melted. And so Grubgreg won. In return, Orn did keep his promise. He built him the door that would keep his treasure safe from all thieves. It would be a door so good, it would stand longer than the mountain it was on. Just as Grubgreg wanted it. However, eventually Grubgreg realized there was no way to open the door. He couldn't get in. And that was because Grubgreg himself was a thief. He didn't steal Orn's gold, but he stole his time. And well, many years went by until we get to Brom's story. Specifically the part that was shown in his original teaser. There, while he was fighting dragons and saving goats, he climbed a mountain where he heard the cries of a troll boy who fell into a cave. The cave was protected by a door that Braum couldn't break. But he could break the mountain, and so he literally punched his way through. After which the mountain started collapsing, he picked up the door and shielded the boy from the rubble. That's the story of how Braum got his shield. But more importantly, technically, even though a big chunk of this place caved in, the treasury of Grub should still be somewhere out there in the Freljord. And it would be really cool if, as you just roam around the mountains, you just randomly find treasure. And there you have it, 5 unconventional places found on Runeterra. I'll be honest, I could probably keep going for a lot longer, but it's been a while since I've made a proper Riot MMO video, and so I can feel I'm not as good as I used to be. Normally I would turn this into 10 places and it would be turned into an hour-long video. But times change, TikTok is a thing, and so don't be surprised if I make like 50 shorts with interesting places.